My mother called me on a Tuesday morning. I remember because I had just finished signing the lease extension for the 14th floor of Meridian Tower, and my assistant had brought me a cup of coffee that I hadn't touched yet. The phone buzzed on my glass desk, and when I saw the number, I sat very still for a moment. It wasn't saved in my contacts. It hadn't been saved in 11 years. But I knew it. The way you know a scar. The way you know the exact sound of a door closing on you for the last time. I let it ring twice before I picked up, not because I was nervous, but because I wanted to be ready. "Clara," my mother said, and her voice was softer than I remembered, worn around the edges like something that had been washed too many times. "Clara, your father and I are downstairs. We're in the lobby. We were hoping we could come up and talk to you." I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office on the 22nd floor of the building that had my name on the lease, the building where I had started as a cleaning contractor 8 years ago, the building I now partially owned through my company, Harlow Property Solutions. I took one slow breath. Then I said, "I'll let the front desk know you can wait in the reception area on the ground floor." And I hung up. If you are just joining this story, welcome. Get comfortable. Because this one has been living inside me for a long time, and I am finally ready to tell it from the very beginning, from the cold October night when I was 17 years old, and my parents put 2 bags on the front porch and told me I had until morning to figure out my life. My name is Clara Harlow. I am 34 years old. I am the founder and CEO of Harlow Property Solutions, a mid-sized commercial real estate management firm that operates across 4 states. I have a daughter named Simone who is 6 and thinks that clouds are just shy rain, and I have a husband named Derek who still makes me laugh every single day. I have a life that I built with my own 2 hands, from nothing, from less than nothing, from the specific kind of nothing that only comes when the people who were supposed to love you decide that you are not worth the effort. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it actually started. Not in that lobby on a Tuesday morning, but in a small yellow house on Deering Avenue in Columbus, Ohio, where I grew up as the middle child of Richard and Patricia Harlow, and where I first learned that love in my family was not something that was given equally. It was something that was rationed, and I was always at the back of the line. My older brother, Marcus, was the golden one. He was 4 years older than me, broad-shouldered, loud in the way that made rooms feel full instead of crowded, and my father worshipped him with a particular intensity that I used to think was just normal until I grew up enough to recognize it as something closer to obsession. Marcus played football in high school. He wasn't exceptionally talented, but my father drove 4 hours to every away game, stood on sidelines in freezing rain, bought Marcus every piece of equipment the coaches recommended, and talked about him at every dinner table like he was being scouted by the NFL rather than playing for a team that lost more games than they won. My younger sister, Becca, was the baby. She was 3 years younger than me, small and pretty with my mother's dark eyes, and she had mastered the art of crying at exactly the right moment from before she could walk. Becca didn't manipulate people consciously, at least not at first. She just learned very early that tears brought my mother running, that a trembling lip could redirect any punishment, and that being the youngest and the most fragile seeming meant she was protected in ways that I simply was not. And then there was me, Clara, the middle one, the one my father called independent when he meant easy to ignore, the one my mother called strong when she meant she'll be fine without us. I was a good student, quietly, consistently good, the kind of good that doesn't make noise because it doesn't come with trophies or touchdowns. I read everything I could find. I kept my room clean without being asked. I worked a part-time job at a grocery store from the time I was 15, not because my parents asked me to contribute, but because I liked having money that was mine, money that no one could take or redirect or spend on Marcus's football cleats. I want to be honest with you about something. My childhood wasn't violent. There were no dramatic scenes of screaming every night. What happened to me was quieter than that, and in some ways that made it harder to name. Harder to explain to people who would later ask why I was so affected by. Parents who had, quote, never done anything terrible. What happened to me was a slow and steady erasure. It was my father leaving my school play early to get home in time to watch Marcus's game recap on the local news. It was my mother forgetting to tell me about the family dinner at my aunt's house and then seeming genuinely surprised when I pointed out that no one had told me. It was the year I got straight A's and received a "good job, Clara" at breakfast, and then 3 weeks later when Marcus passed 2 classes after failing 4, my parents threw him a dinner at his favorite steakhouse and invited the whole extended family. It was the Christmas I asked for a specific art book I had been wanting for months and received a gift card to a store I never shopped at, while Becca received the exact leather jacket she had pointed to in a magazine in September because my mother had written it down. These things add up. They add up slowly and quietly, the way water fills a room that has no drain, and after a while you are not standing in a room anymore. You are underwater. By the time I was 15, I had started to understand that I needed to build something for myself because what existed in that house was not being built for me. By the time I was 16, I had started researching colleges obsessively, printing out scholarship information from the school library, making lists of programs and deadlines and requirements in a notebook I kept in my backpack because I had learned not to leave important things where they could be moved or lost or forgotten. And then came the summer before my senior year, the summer I was 17, and everything I had been quietly building for myself was pulled out from under me in a single conversation at the kitchen table. My father had lost his job in the spring. He worked in logistics management, and the company he had been with for 11 years had restructured, and he was let go with a severance package that my parents burned through faster than I understood at the time. Money got tight in the house. I noticed because the grocery store trips got shorter and my mother stopped buying the name-brand cereal and the heating in my room seemed to be turned down lower than everyone else's. I didn't complain. I picked up extra shifts at the grocery store and put most of my money into a savings account I had opened on my own at the bank 2 blocks from my school. I was saving for application fees, for textbooks, for whatever gap might exist between what scholarships covered and what college actually cost. One evening in late August, my parents called me into the kitchen. Marcus was there too, sitting at the table with his arms crossed, and Becca was on the couch in the next room watching television. My father sat at the head of the table. My mother stood near the counter. My father said, "Clara, we need to talk about your savings account." I felt something cold move through me. I said, "Okay." He said, "We've been going through a difficult period as a family. We need to borrow the money you have saved. We'll pay you back once I'm back on my feet." I had $4,260 in that account. I had worked for 2 years for that money. I had skipped school trips and declined invitations from friends and worn the same 3 pairs of shoes in rotation to save that money. I said very carefully, "That money is for college. I need it for application fees and books and deposits." My mother said, "Clara, family comes first. We're struggling." I said, "I've been giving you part of my paycheck every month for the last year. I saved this separately because it's for my future." My father's face did something that I had seen it do before when I pushed back on something he had decided. It went flat and hard and distant, like a door closing. He said, "This is not a negotiation. You live under our roof. We are a family. We need this money, and you are going to contribute." Marcus said nothing. He looked at the table. Becca had turned down the television in the other room, and I knew she was listening, and she said nothing either. I said no. That was the first time I had ever said a direct and complete no to my father about anything that mattered. I said, "No, I will not give you that money. It is mine and I earned it and it is for college." My father stood up from the table. He wasn't a violent man, but he was a large one, and when he stood up and looked at me the way he looked at me in that moment, I understood in my body what it meant to be made to feel small. He said, "Then you can figure out your own life. If you won't contribute to this family, you don't get to be part of it." I thought it was anger talking. I thought by morning it would pass, the way other arguments had passed, dissolving into silence and then into the ordinary sounds of the house. I went to my room. I sat on my bed for a long time. And then just before midnight, my mother knocked on my door and told me that my father had made his decision and that she agreed with it, and that I needed to pack what I could carry because he wanted me out by morning. I looked at my mother for a long moment. I wanted her to tell me she was kidding. I wanted her to sit on the edge of my bed the way mothers do in movies and tell me that she had fought for me, that she had told him he was wrong, that whatever happened, she was my mother and she was on my side. She didn't do any of those things. She said, "I'm sorry, Clara, but you know how your father is." And then she left. I packed 2 bags that night. I took my clothes, my notebook with all my college research, the small amount of cash I had at home, my school documents, my birth certificate, which I had the presence of mind to take from the filing cabinet in the hallway while the house slept, and my library card, which I don't know why I took except that it felt like something that was mine. My father put the 2 bags on the front porch while I was still in the hallway, and at 7 in the morning on an October day that was already cold enough to see my breath, I walked out the front door of the yellow house on Deering Avenue and stood on the sidewalk and looked at the street and thought, okay, Clara, this is where it starts. If you are listening from somewhere warm right now, I want you to sit with that image for a moment. 17 years old, 2 bags, a street in October, and nowhere to go. I want you to also know that I am telling you this not for sympathy, because I stopped needing sympathy for that night a long time ago. I am telling you this because every single thing that comes next, every hard year and every small victory and every door I kicked open when no one would let me in, started on that sidewalk. The first person who helped me was a woman named Gloria Sims. She was the mother of my classmate Janelle, and she lived in a small apartment 12 blocks from my parents' house. I called Janelle from a payphone because I didn't have a cell phone at the time, and when she answered, I told her what had happened in the flattest voice I could manage, because I knew if I let any feeling into my voice, I would fall apart completely, and I could not afford to fall apart. Janelle said, "Come here right now." Gloria Sims was a large woman with a direct manner and a small apartment that already had too many people in it. She had Janelle's younger twin brothers, and her own mother living there. There was no extra bedroom. There was barely an extra chair. But when I showed up at her door with my 2 bags and my October cold face, she looked at me for one long moment, and then she stepped aside and let me in, and she said, "You can take the couch until we figure something out." I slept on Gloria's couch for 4 months. I want you to understand what those 4 months were like. I went to school every day. I maintained my grades. I kept working at the grocery store. I did not tell my teachers what had happened because I was terrified of what would happen if anyone official got involved, terrified that somehow the situation would be made worse, that I would be sent somewhere worse, that I would lose the small, fragile stability of that couch and that apartment and that woman who owed me absolutely nothing and gave me everything she had to give. I applied to 6 colleges that fall. I used the school library computer to fill out the applications. I wrote essays about resilience and goals and the future, and every word I wrote was true, even though none of it mentioned what was actually happening in my life, because I couldn't figure out how to explain it without sounding like a tragedy, and I refused to be a tragedy. I received scholarship offers from 2 schools. I chose Wentworth State University because it offered me a full academic scholarship plus a small housing stipend, and because it was 3 hours away from Columbus, and 3 hours felt like exactly the right amount of distance. I graduated high school in June with honors. My name was called at graduation, and I walked across the stage in a gown that Gloria had ironed for me that morning. And in the audience, Janelle and her brothers cheered so loud that people around them turned to look, and Gloria cried, and I held my diploma and looked out at the auditorium and found the empty space where my parents were not sitting, and I made myself a quiet promise that I have kept every single day since. Before I tell you about college and what happened there, I need to tell you that during those 4 months on Gloria's couch, my parents did not call once, not once. Marcus sent me a single text message in November that said, "Hope you're okay," with no follow-up when I didn't respond. Becca sent me nothing. The family that had raised me erased me from their daily life with a completeness that should have broken me, but instead clarified something I had always half known and never let myself fully believe, which was that I had always been on my own, really. And now I just knew it without the confusion of living inside the same house. At Wentworth State, I studied business administration with a concentration in finance. I chose it because it was practical, because I was interested in how money moved and how structures were built, and because I had spent enough of my life watching money be mismanaged to want to understand how to handle it correctly. I worked 2 jobs. I tutored other students in math and economics through the campus tutoring center, and I worked weekend shifts at a property management company near campus called Bellevue Properties, which is where everything truly began, though I didn't know it yet. Bellevue Properties was run by a man named Howard Chen, who was 61 years old, meticulous, demanding, and one of the most genuinely fair people I had ever encountered. He hired me to do administrative work, data entry, lease filing, phone calls, the kind of entry-level work that most people treat as beneath them. I did not treat it as beneath me. I treated every task like it was the most important thing I had ever been asked to do, because in a way it was, because every task was teaching me something, and I was hungry for every lesson available to me. Howard noticed. Within 6 months, he had moved me from administrative support to assisting his property analysts. Within a year, he was asking me to sit in on client meetings. He told me once, at the end of a long day when we were both reviewing lease documents at the small conference table in his office, "Clara, you see things that other people walk past. That's rare. Don't let anyone talk you out of it." I graduated from Wentworth State 3 years later with honors and a job offer from Howard to stay on at Bellevue full-time as a junior property manager. I took it. I also want to tell you what happened during those college years with my family, because there is a chapter in this story that happened quietly, in the background, that you need to know about. In the middle of my second year at Wentworth, my mother called me. It was the first contact I had received from either parent since the morning I left. She called from a number I didn't recognize, probably a new phone, and when I answered and heard her voice, I had to sit down on the edge of my dorm room bed and press my hand flat against my knee to keep it steady. She asked how I was. I said I was fine. She said she had been thinking about me. I said nothing. She said that things at home had been difficult and that she hoped I understood that my father had done what he thought was best. I said, "He put his 17-year-old daughter on the street in October." There was a long silence. Then she said, "You always were so dramatic, Clara." And something in me that had still been soft about her went hard and quiet. I said, "Is there something specific you were calling about?" She said that Marcus was getting married and that it would mean a lot to the family if I could come to the wedding and that maybe we could all start fresh. I thought about that for a moment. I thought about the kitchen table and the college money and the midnight knock on my door and the couch at Gloria's and the graduation she didn't attend. I said, "I'll think about it." I did not go to the wedding. I sent a card. I did not hear from them again for 3 years. By the time I was 26, I had worked my way up to a senior property manager position at Bellevue and had begun quietly studying for my real estate broker's license. Howard had become something between a mentor and a grandfather figure to me, the kind of elder who tells you hard truths without cruelty and celebrates your wins without jealousy. He knew the basics of my family situation, not everything, but enough, and he had a practice of never pressing me for more than I was ready to give. It was Howard who first said to me, "You should think about your own firm eventually. Not yet, but eventually." I was 28 when I met Derek. He was a structural engineer who did consulting work for commercial properties, and we met at a site inspection for a building Bellevue was considering managing. He was standing in the middle of what would eventually be the lobby, holding a clipboard, wearing a hard hat slightly too large for his head, and arguing very politely but very firmly with a contractor about load-bearing specifications, and I watched him for a moment from the doorway and thought, that man does not back down from things he knows are right. I liked that about him immediately. We were married 2 years later. His family was warm and present and enormously confusing to me at first, because I kept waiting for the conditions, kept waiting for the moment when their kindness would reveal itself as something contingent, something I would have to earn continuously. It took me a long time to sit inside their love without bracing for it to be withdrawn. Derek understood this about me without requiring a full explanation. He is that kind of person. Our daughter Simone was born the year I turned 30, the same year I left Bellevue Properties after 8 years and registered Harlow Property Solutions as a licensed business entity in the state of Ohio. Howard was the first person to send flowers when the company was officially registered. The card said, "I knew you would. Go be extraordinary." Starting a company while raising a newborn is not something I would recommend to anyone who enjoys sleeping. It is also not something I regret for a single second. I had saved aggressively for 4 years with the explicit goal of having startup capital. I had built relationships across the commercial property industry, and I had a reputation in the market for being someone who solved problems without creating new ones, which in property management is worth more than almost any other professional quality. The first year was brutal. I managed 4 small commercial properties and worked 18-hour days, and Derek made dinner every night and brought Simone to the office some afternoons, and I missed several things I wish I had not missed, and I am honest with myself about that. But I kept the books clean, and I kept my clients happy, and I kept adding to the portfolio one property at a time, the way you build anything real, which is slowly and without shortcuts. By the time I was 32, Harlow Property Solutions managed 23 commercial properties across Ohio and Kentucky. By the time I was 33, we had expanded into Tennessee and were in conversations about Virginia. By the time I received that phone call on a Tuesday morning in the 34th year of my life, my company managed 41 properties, including a partial ownership stake in Meridian Tower, the building my parents were sitting in the lobby of while I held the phone and looked out at the city below me. Now I need to tell you what had been happening with my family during the years I had been building all of this, because this is where the story gets complicated in ways that matter. About 2 years after I launched Harlow Property Solutions, I had received a call from Becca. She was 30 years old by then, living back at my parents' house in Columbus after a divorce, working part-time. The call was friendly at first, catching up, the surface-level conversation of 2 people who are related but do not know each other. Then she mentioned that my father's health had been declining. "Heart issues," she said, "and some problems with his vision." She mentioned it the way you mention something when you are building toward a different point, casually, like weather. Then she asked if I was doing well financially. I said yes. She said that was wonderful, that she had always known I would land on my feet, that I was always so capable. Then she asked if I would be willing to contribute to my father's medical bills because things were tight and Marcus had his own family to support and she just didn't know what else to do. I sat with that for a long moment. I said, "Becca, how is Dad doing?" She said he was managing. I said, "Is he in immediate danger?" She said no. It was more about maintenance medication and some specialist appointments. I said, "I'm sorry to hear he's dealing with health issues. I'm not in a position to contribute to the household finances right now, but thank you for reaching out." She said, "Clara, he's your father." I said, "I know." And I let the silence sit there between us. She called twice more that year with similar conversations. Each time I was polite. Each time I declined. Each time the call ended with the particular frostiness of someone who expected a different answer. Have you ever dealt with family members who only call when they need something? I want you to drop a comment below and tell me, because I know I am not the only one, and sometimes it helps just to know that other people understand exactly what that feels like. Then, about 8 months, before the Tuesday of the lobby phone call, something happened that I need to tell you carefully because it is the heart of everything. I received a certified letter from an attorney in Columbus named Raymond Voss. The letter informed me that my maternal grandmother, Eleanor Grace Harlow, had passed away 6 weeks prior. I had not known my grandmother was ill. I had not known she had been hospitalized. I had not been informed of her death, of her funeral, of any of it. The letter informed me of her passing because I had been named in her will. My grandmother had left me a sum of money. It wasn't enormous, but it was significant. $60,000, along with a handwritten letter that Attorney Voss enclosed in a sealed envelope with my name written on it in my grandmother's careful cursive. I sat in my office with the door closed and I read that letter 3 times. My grandmother wrote that she had watched what happened to me from a distance and that she had been ashamed that she had not done more when I was young. She wrote that she had argued with my father about what he had done the night he put me out, and that he had told her it was none of her business and had limited her access to all of us for a period after that. She wrote that she had followed my career through whatever she could find, that someone had shown her an article in a trade publication about Harlow Property Solutions, and that she had cut it out and kept it. She wrote that she was proud of me. She wrote that she loved me. She wrote, "You deserved better, Clara. I hope this helps build more of what you have already built so beautifully on your own." I cried in my office for 20 minutes. Then I washed my face, and I went back to work. But here is what the letter from Attorney Voss also revealed, buried in the formal legal language of the second page. My grandmother's estate had originally been structured to leave equal portions to all of her grandchildren, including me. At some point in the last 5 years, my father had attempted to have my portion redirected to Marcus on the grounds that I had estranged myself from the family and was financially independent and therefore not in need of support. Attorney Voss had flagged this attempted modification as legally improper because my grandmother had not authorized it and had in fact explicitly reaffirmed my inclusion in her will during her final hospitalization. My father had tried to take my inheritance from my grandmother. My father had tried to take money that my own grandmother had set aside for me, using the story that I had abandoned the family, erasing the truth of what had actually happened, and presenting himself as the aggrieved party to an attorney who, fortunately, had done his job correctly. I held that piece of paper in my hands and felt something move through me that was not quite anger and not quite grief and not quite satisfaction, but somewhere in the middle of all three, the specific feeling of finally having a document that said in plain legal language what I had always known in my body to be true. I instructed Attorney Voss to process the inheritance as my grandmother had intended. I deposited the money into a separate account. I did not contact my family. And then, about 6 weeks later, I received the call on that Tuesday morning. My parents were in the lobby. Let me tell you what I found out in the days before that call because I need you to understand that I had not been sitting in the dark. I had known what was coming, roughly. Janelle, who had stayed my closest friend all these years and still lived in Columbus, had told me that Marcus's business, a small contracting company he had started, had collapsed under a series of mismanaged contracts and a debt situation he had apparently hidden from his wife until it became impossible to hide. She told me that my parents' financial situation had deteriorated significantly, that my father's health issues had generated real medical debt, and that the house on Deering Avenue was under threat of foreclosure. She told me, with the particular gentleness of a true friend delivering difficult information, that she had heard through people they both knew that my parents had been telling people in the neighborhood and at their church that they had sacrificed enormously for their children and had been abandoned by their middle daughter who was now some kind of real estate executive in the city and refused to help her own family. I received this information and I sat with it. And then I called my attorney, a woman named Patricia Cole, who had been with me since I incorporated, and I told her to pull together a specific set of documents. I asked for the attorney's report from Raymond Voss regarding my grandmother's estate. I asked for the documented history of any formal contact between myself and my parents over the past 11 years, which was sparse but existed. And I asked Patricia to prepare a clear and organized summary of the financial history, the grocery store savings account from when I was 17, the college scholarship documentation, the couch at Gloria's, all of it. Not because I was planning to go to court, but because I was done being described as the villain in a story where I was the one who had been put outside with 2 bags at 17 years old. My assistant called down to the front desk and let them know that my parents could wait in the reception area. I finished my coffee, which had gone cold. I reviewed 2 lease documents that needed my signature. I answered 4 emails. And then I took the elevator down to the lobby of Meridian Tower, the building where I had started by managing cleaning contracts 8 years ago, the building where I had negotiated my first partial ownership stake 2 years ago, and I walked into the reception area and I saw them. My father was 70 now, or close to it. He looked smaller than I remembered, which is something people say about their parents when they see them again after a long time, and I had always thought it was a cliché, but it is simply true. He was sitting in one of the reception chairs with his hands on his knees, and he looked like a man who had recently had the confidence knocked out of him and hadn't found it again. My mother was beside him. She was in her late 60s, still recognizable, still with the dark eyes that Becca had inherited, but tired in a way that went deeper than sleep. When she saw me, she stood up and her face did something complicated that I didn't try to interpret. I said, "Hello." My father looked up at me. For a moment, he didn't say anything, and I watched something move across his face, something that might have been shame if he'd had more practice with it. Then he said, "Clara, you look well." I said, "Thank you." I did not say he looked well because I try not to say things that are not true. I said, "Why don't we go to the small conference room?" I had specifically chosen not to bring them to my office. The conference room on the ground floor was neutral, professional, impersonal. It had a table and chairs and water and nothing that was mine in a personal sense. We sat down. My mother had brought a folder. I noticed it, but I didn't comment on it. My father cleared his throat. He said, "Clara, I know that a lot of time has passed and that things ended badly between us, but we are family and we need your help." I said, "What kind of help?" He said that the house was facing foreclosure. He said that Marcus's business had failed and Marcus was dealing with his own debts. He said that the medical bills had piled up over several years. He said that Becca was trying to help, but she didn't have the resources. He said that he knew I had done well for myself, and that as my father, he was asking me, one time, to help the family through a crisis. I let him finish. Then I said, "Before we talk about any of that, I need to talk about a few things first." My mother's hands moved slightly in her lap. I reached into the folder I had brought, the one Patricia had prepared, and I laid 3 documents on the table. The first was a certified copy of the report from attorney Raymond Voss, documenting the attempted redirection of my portion of my grandmother Eleanor's estate, including the notation that my father had represented to the attorney that I had estranged myself from the family voluntarily. The second was a copy of the original savings account statement from the bank account I had opened at 15, showing the balance of $4,260 as of the night my parents asked for it, along with a handwritten note I had kept for 11 years, written in my own 17-year-old handwriting, detailing what had been said at the kitchen table that night. I had written it down the next morning at Gloria's kitchen table because even at 17 I had understood that memory is fragile and documentation is not. The third was a copy of a printed email exchange that Janelle had screenshot and sent to me, an exchange from a community Facebook group in Columbus where my father had written a lengthy post about his children, describing Marcus as hardworking, describing Becca as devoted, and describing me as the one who chose money over family, and who turned her back on us when we needed her most. I placed all 3 documents on the table and I said, "I want you to understand that I am not doing this to be cruel. I am doing this because for 11 years I have been described as someone who abandoned her family, and I need us to be in the same room with the truth before we talk about anything else." My father looked at the documents. His jaw tightened. My mother looked at them and then looked away. I said, "You asked me for money that I had saved for my own future when I was 17 years old. When I said, 'No, you put me out of the house. I was a minor. I had nowhere to go. I slept on a friend's couch for 4 months and I applied to college from a school library computer and I did not receive a single dollar of help from this family. I am not saying this to wound you. I am saying it because it is true and because it needs to be said out loud in this room." My mother said, very quietly, We made a mistake. I looked at her. It was the first time in my life I had heard her say those words about that night. I said, "Yes, you did." My father said nothing. His hands were flat on the table. I said, "I also know that you tried to have my portion of Grandma Eleanor's estate redirected away from me. I have the documentation. I know you told the attorney I had left the family by choice." My father's face went red. He said, "That was a misunderstanding." I said, "No, it wasn't. And I need you to understand that I know exactly what it was." There was a long silence. The kind of silence that has weight to it. The kind that presses down on a room and makes everyone in it feel what they have been avoiding feeling. My mother was crying quietly. Not dramatically, not the way Becca used to cry to redirect situations, but the small, genuine inward crying of someone who is finally sitting inside something they have been running from. My father looked at the table. I said, "I am not going to give you money to save the house on Deering Avenue." My father's eyes came up sharply. I said, "But I am going to tell you what I am willing to do, because despite everything, I did not come down here to watch you suffer, and I did not keep these documents for 11 years because I wanted to destroy you. I kept them because I needed to know that one day I would have the chance to stand in a room with you and be seen clearly." I slid the documents back across to my side of the table. I said, "There is a senior housing development in the Westerville area that Harlow Property Solutions has a relationship with. It is clean and safe, and the rent is income adjusted. I will make a call and I will get you on the priority list. That is what I am able to offer." My mother looked up. My father was very still. I said, "I am also willing to have a relationship with you going forward, but it will be on terms that are honest. If either of you ever again tells anyone in Columbus or anywhere else that I abandoned this family, I will have no further contact. If you would like to rebuild something real, slowly, honestly, without the version of me that you invented to protect yourselves from the truth of what you did, then I am open to that. Slowly, honestly." I stood up. I extended my hand to my father, which is a strange thing to do with a parent, I know, but it felt right, formal and real and equal in a way that a hug would not have been. He looked at my hand for a moment, then he shook it. His grip was less strong than I remembered. My mother reached across the table and put her hand over mine briefly before I withdrew it, and she said, "I am sorry, Clara. I am truly sorry." I nodded. I believed her. Not completely, not with the open, unguarded belief of a daughter who had never been hurt, but with the careful, realistic belief of a woman who had learned that people are capable of being sorry, and that sorry doesn't fix everything, and that it is still worth something when it is real. I took the elevator back up to the 22nd floor. I stood at my office window for a moment and looked at the city. Simone had a school event that evening, something involving clay animals she had made, and Derek had texted me a photo of one that was supposed to be a horse but looked more like a determined rectangle, and I had laughed at my phone in the elevator on the way back up. I had a 3 o'clock call with our Virginia contacts and a lease review to finish before end of day, and a company all-hands meeting on Thursday that I needed to prepare remarks for. My life was full. My life was mine. I had not given them the dramatic confrontation they might have expected, and I had not given them the rescue they had come for, and I had not given them the absolution that people who have hurt someone sometimes seek when they are in trouble, the quick forgiveness that wipes the slate clean and lets them feel better without doing the work of actually being better. What I had given them was the truth, and what I kept for myself was everything I had built, everything I had earned, everything that existed because a 17-year-old girl with 2 bags and a library card and a couch to sleep on had decided that the people who gave up on her were not going to be the last word on who she was. My grandmother's letter is framed in my home office, not because I need it to remind me who I am, but because her handwriting is beautiful, and because she saw me, and because some things deserve to be held onto not out of pain, but out of love. Gloria Sims came to the Harlow Property Solutions 5th anniversary party last year. She sat at a table with Derek's parents and Janelle and Howard Chen, who came all the way from Columbus at 69 years old in a suit that was slightly too formal for the occasion and was absolutely perfect. I gave a short speech and I thanked the people in the room who had shown up when I had needed showing up for, and Gloria cried, and Howard pretended he was not crying, and Derek took a video on his phone that I have watched more times than I will admit. As for Marcus, he reached out about a year after the lobby meeting. His message was brief. He said he had been thinking about the night I left. He said he was sorry he hadn't spoken up. He said he'd like to talk sometime if I was open to it. I responded 3 days later and said I was open to it, slowly. We have had 4 phone calls since then. It is not a close relationship. It may never be. But it is honest. And that is more than we ever had before. Becca and I have not spoken since the loan requests. I have left that door unlocked, but I have not opened it, and she has not knocked. Maybe one day, maybe not. I have stopped organizing my peace around whether or not the people who hurt me ever fully arrive at their accountability. My peace is mine. I built it the same way I built everything else, one day at a time, with clear eyes and steady hands, and the absolute refusal to let anyone else decide what I was worth. That 17-year-old girl on the sidewalk in October didn't know what was coming. She only knew she had to move forward, and so she did, one step at a time, into a life that ended up being bigger and fuller and more real than anything that had been offered to her inside that yellow house on Deering Avenue. And if you have ever been that person, standing somewhere cold with everything you own in 2 bags, told by someone who should have known better that you were not worth keeping, I want you to hear this directly. You were worth keeping. You were always worth keeping. And the fact that they couldn't see it never made it less true. If this story resonated with you, if any part of it felt familiar or gave you something to hold on to, please subscribe to this channel because there are more stories here, real and human and honest, waiting for you. And drop a comment telling me where you are listening from today. I read every single one. This is Clara Harlow's story, and it is mine, and I am so glad I stayed to tell it.